The galaxy had always been full of noise. Communication signals, trading calls, ship movements, and endless discussions between star systems filled the space with energy and life. The Andurian Alliance stood at the center of it all, powerful, wealthy, and proud. For thousands of years, their fleets patrolled the stars. Their scientists shaped the future, and their culture spread across hundreds of worlds. They believed nothing could shake them. But all great empires believe that, until something comes that reminds them how small they truly are. It started quietly, like a whisper in the background of a busy world. A mining outpost near the edge of the Alliance reported strange readings, energy distortions, patterns that didn't match any known signal. Then came the silence. The station stopped responding. Rescue ships were sent, but none returned. The Andurian leaders, always confident, assumed it was a technical issue, maybe pirates, maybe a solar flare. They were wrong. Weeks later, the same phenomenon appeared in nearby systems. Planets that once glowed bright on galactic maps flickered, dimmed, and went dark. Ships traveling near the affected zones vanished without a trace. Scientists called it the Selene Rift, a cosmic infection that didn't just destroy, it consumed. It ate through matter, energy, and even subspace itself, leaving behind an expanding scar of emptiness. At first, the Alliance tried to contain it. Massive fleets were sent with their most powerful technology, but the more they fought, the faster it spread. Entire colonies were swallowed in hours. The proud Andurian navy, once unmatched, was forced to retreat, leaving behind millions of their own people. Panic spread faster than the plague. Citizens fled to the core worlds, crowding into cities that could barely hold them. Governments began to argue, blaming each other for what had happened. Some said it was a weapon. Others believed it was a punishment from the stars. But for those who had seen it up close, and for the miners, soldiers, and refugees, it was something far worse. It was death without sound, destruction without reason. The Andurian Council held emergency meetings every day. Scientists worked endlessly, trying to understand the rift. Nothing worked. Energy shields collapsed, weapons had no effect, and every attempt to study it ended the same way, with more loss. The Alliance sent distress signals across the stars, begging for help. Their messages were desperate, filled with trembling voices and breaking static. They called out to everyone, allies, rivals, even former enemies. Plea7 one transmission said, "If anyone can hear us, we are dying." For the first time in thousands of years, the Andurians realized how fragile they were. Days turned into weeks. Their calls went unanswered. The galaxy had gone silent. At first, they thought maybe their messages hadn't reached anyone. But soon, smaller ships began returning with reports. The messages had been received and ignored. The nearby empires had closed their borders. Some even destroyed Andurian ships trying to cross. The Veshar Dominion, once their closest ally, sent only a cold official statement. "Our hearts grieve for your loss, but our worlds must be protected." The Andurians couldn't believe it. For centuries, they had been the center of galactic civilization. They had helped others, offered aid, shared technology. And now, when they were the ones crying for help, not a single world opened its doors. It was like watching an entire civilization lose faith, not just in their power, but in the idea of unity itself. Cities began to fall apart. Power grids failed. Refugee ships floated helplessly between dying stars, searching for anywhere to land. The once beautiful capital of Anduria Prime became a place of fear and smoke. The government broadcasted messages of hope, but the people had stopped listening. Every night, the sky seemed dimmer. The scientists eventually admitted what everyone feared. The Selene Rift was moving toward the heart of their territory. If nothing stopped it, the Andurian homeworld would be gone within months. In one of the last emergency council meetings, a senior official stood before the other members and said in a broken voice, "We built ships that crossed galaxies. We built cities that touched the stars. And yet when we cried out, the stars turned their backs." After that, the transmissions changed. They were no longer messages asking for help. They became confessions, goodbyes to the galaxy. Recordings of families sending final messages to anyone who might someday find them. One mother, holding her child close, spoke into a cracked screen. "If anyone hears this, please tell my daughter's story. Tell them we tried." That message was repeated across hundreds of systems. The Andurians didn't expect rescue anymore. They only wanted someone somewhere to remember that they existed. As the rift drew closer, entire fleets were abandoned. Military officers stopped giving orders. Civilians looted the remains of government stockpiles, desperate to survive. The sense of unity that had once held the Alliance together was gone. But there was one thing still spreading: their final distress beacon. It continued to echo across the void, bouncing from star to star, carrying a single plea. We are dying. Is anyone out there? Far beyond the dying region of space, on the edge of a small spiral arm, a quiet blue planet turned slowly around its yellow sun. Its people had their own problems: wars, politics, and endless arguments about who was right and who was wrong. But among all their noise, somewhere in orbit around Mars, an old satellite picked up something unexpected: a weak, fading signal. The message was barely readable, but the words were clear enough. We are dying. Please, anyone. No one knew yet what this message would lead to. No one could have imagined that this single moment, this single cry for help, would change the history of the galaxy. But that's how history often begins. Not with thunder or explosions, but with a quiet, desperate voice in the dark, asking if anyone is listening. And on that small blue world, someone was. The Andurian Alliance didn't know it yet, but hope was about to arrive from the most unexpected place in the universe. From a species they had long dismissed as young, reckless, and too emotional to matter. From Earth. The Andurian Alliance had sent out distress signals across the galaxy, their voices trembling through subspace as if begging the universe itself to listen. They had asked everyone, friends, neighbors, allies, even those who had once been rivals, for help. And yet, as days turned into weeks, as weeks stretched into months, there was nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but heavy and suffocating. The Andurians began to notice a painful truth. They weren't ignored by accident. The galaxy had turned its back on them. Messages sent to nearby civilizations went unanswered. Fleets sent to offer assistance were blocked, denied entry, or outright attacked. It wasn't cruelty. It was fear, selfishness, or maybe indifference. No one was willing to risk themselves for the Andurians. No one cared. At first there was shock. Leaders refused to believe it. They told themselves the messages hadn't reached the right people. They repeated the signals, amplified the transmissions, broadcast them in every known channel, in every language, in every frequency. And yet still there was only the cold echo of their own voices bouncing back to them. People began to panic. On worlds that had never seen war, citizens barricaded themselves inside homes. Streets that were once full of life now lay empty, littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. Ships intended for evacuations drifted aimlessly, waiting for docking permissions that never came. Communication hubs buzzed endlessly, but there was no response from the outside world. Families began recording their final messages, messages that were not meant to be broadcast for help anymore, but for memory. Parents spoke to their children, telling them that someone somewhere might hear their story. Scientists documented every failed experiment, every attempt to slow the Ceylan rift, and every sacrifice made along the way. It was as if the Alliance itself was preparing a time capsule to leave behind, in case the universe eventually cared to notice. In the heart of the Andurian capital, the council chambers fell silent. Leaders who had once spoken with authority now sat in stunned disbelief, watching as their worlds fell one by one. Plans to fight back had failed. Massive fleets had been destroyed. Starports had been burned. Cities that once glittered in the light of 1,000 suns were now dark, lifeless husks. And yet, even as despair tightened its grip, some refused to give up entirely. A few scientists, engineers, and military officers clung to hope, even when hope seemed impossible. They worked tirelessly, attempting new experiments to slow the spread of the Ceylan rift, but every result was a reminder of their limits. Technology alone could not stop it. Power alone could not stop it. The only thing that might have worked, unity among the galaxy's civilizations, had failed. As the Ceylan rift continued its relentless march, the Andurians began to understand something profound. They had lived in a universe that valued pride, reputation, and appearances more than compassion. They had believed that power guaranteed loyalty, and that alliances meant protection. They were wrong. The galaxy, they realized, was full of civilizations that valued their own safety above all else. This realization hit them harder than the rift itself. It was a kind of grief that no weapon could defend against. It was not just the fear of dying. It was the fear of being abandoned, of being forgotten, of being left alone while the universe watched silently. Every night, the Andurian skies glowed with the light of ships moving too slowly, refugees drifting in orbit, and dying cities signaling faint flares of hope that no one answered. Even the stars seemed dimmer. The civilizations that had once seemed eternal now seemed small, fragile, and selfish. Despite all this, the Andurians continued to send messages. Some were desperate, pleading for help. Others were angry, accusing other civilizations of cowardice. A few were almost poetic, filled with the sorrow and resignation of those who had seen everything they loved disappear. The transmissions became a haunting chorus of voices from a dying empire. "Is anyone there?" one voice asked. "Can anyone hear us?" Weeks later, the Andurians realized that perhaps the question itself was more important than the answer. The call for help had to be made no matter what, because to stop would mean to give up entirely. They kept broadcasting, not knowing if anyone would respond, not knowing if anyone even could. Meanwhile, far beyond the suffering worlds, in a small, blue planet orbiting an ordinary star, something unexpected happened. Among the chaos and noise of their own problems, humans detected the Andurian transmissions. At first it seemed like interference. The signal was weak, fading, distorted by time and distance. But the message was clear enough to understand. The Andurians were dying. The Salen Rift was unstoppable and no one else was willing to help. Back on Andurian worlds, life continued under the shadow of collapse. Parents hugged their children closer. Communities shared what little food they had left. Scientists and soldiers worked side by side, refusing to leave even as the Salen Rift approached their home systems. They knew they might not survive, but they were determined to do what they could. They had built a civilization that lasted thousands of years, and even as it crumbled, they refused to let it disappear without a fight. And still, they called out into the void. Every day, every night, they spoke to the universe, to anyone who might care, to anyone who might answer. Their transmissions carried not just information, but emotion. Not just facts, but fear, grief, hope, and love. The Andurians were proud, strong, and intelligent, but now they were vulnerable. And in their vulnerability, their voices became something more than signals. They became a story, a plea, a heartbeat echoing across the stars. No one responded. Or at least, that's what the Andurians thought. The universe, vast as it was, had grown quiet. Alliances had dissolved into self-interest. Trade networks had collapsed. Even those civilizations that had once been friends of the Andurians avoided contact. The silence became unbearable, heavier than the darkness surrounding their worlds. And then, in the distance, something stirred. A signal that did not come from the great empires or the powerful fleets. A small, distant planet, unremarkable in most star charts, listened. And someone there decided that the Andurians would not be left to die alone. It was not an empire that responded. It was not a council or a coalition. It was humanity, messy, chaotic, unpredictable, and emotional. Humanity, which had been dismissed as primitive and weak, heard the cries of a dying civilization and chose to act. At first, the Andurians did not notice. Their transmissions continued, desperate and mournful, but somewhere beyond the void, humans were planning. They were gathering ships, assembling teams, preparing for a journey across light years to reach a species they had never met, to help those who had been abandoned by the galaxy. The Andurians could not know yet, but their cries would not go unanswered. For the first time in months, hope began to flicker, fragile and small in the dark. It started with the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had heard them, that someone had recognized their suffering and chosen to act. And even before the humans arrived, even before any help had reached them, that knowledge changed something in the Andurians. They realized that the universe was not entirely cruel, that there were beings capable of compassion, that perhaps even in the darkest moments someone could choose to care. And so the Andurians continued to broadcast, not just out of desperation, but with a renewed purpose. They did not know who was listening or when help would come or if it would come at all. But they had discovered a small truth. They were not entirely alone. And in the vast, cold expanse of space, that small truth was enough to ignite a spark. The galaxy might have turned its back, but someone had not. And that someone would change everything. The Andurians did not know it yet. They could not imagine it, But soon the quiet blue planet would send a fleet not built for conquest, not built for power, but built for one purpose: to save strangers, because they could. And in that simple choice, a new chapter of history was about to begin. The universe had grown silent, but the silence was about to be broken. Far beyond the collapsing Andurian worlds, the message had traveled silently across the void. It was weak, almost fading into the endless static of space, but someone noticed it. On a quiet blue planet orbiting an ordinary star, instruments designed for research and satellite communication picked up the strange signal. At first, technicians thought it was interference, another glitch in the endless data flowing from space. But when they analyzed it carefully, they realized this was different. The signal carried a voice, desperate, trembling, a civilization on the brink of extinction calling out for help. The humans listening did not fully understand who was sending it. They could not read the alien language entirely, but fragments of meaning were clear enough. The messages spoke of dying planets, entire cities disappearing, fleets being destroyed. The voice was not asking for gifts or alliances. It was asking for help. The Andurians were pleading for someone to come, to save them, to not let their entire civilization vanish. In government offices, scientists' labs, and private space research centers, the news caused a stir. Some immediately dismissed it, saying it was a hoax, a distorted signal from some distant star. Others argued endlessly about the risks. Why should we get involved? Officials asked. It's light years away. It's not our problem. We have enough challenges here on Earth. But some humans felt something different. They heard not just a message, but a cry for life. A voice echoing through the darkness asking, "Can anyone hear us?" And for them, ignoring it was impossible. A small coalition began to form, not made up of governments, but ordinary humans united by a shared belief. Someone needed to act. Engineers, scientists, pilots, retired military officers, and volunteers from every walk of life gathered together. They called it Project Haven. It was risky. There were no blueprints, no prior experience in helping a civilization light years away. But humans had something the galaxy seemed to lack: courage mixed with stubbornness and compassion. The group worked tirelessly. They analyzed the alien signal, piecing together what they could understand about the Andurians' technology, their biology, and the disaster destroying their worlds. They built ships, not the massive warships of the galaxy's empires, but vessels designed for speed, adaptability, and resilience. Humans modified existing technology, combining their knowledge with what they could learn from the faint traces of Andurian transmissions. It was improvisation at its finest, driven by determination and a refusal to give up. Days became weeks as preparations continued. Each team member knew the risks. Traveling across light years to aid an alien species they had never met was dangerous. There were no guarantees. Many believed they might not survive. Yet every single person involved understood something simple. If the Andurians died, there would be no one left to remember their civilization. No one to show that life, even in the darkest moments, could matter to someone else. Finally, after months of preparation, the human fleet was ready. It was not large compared to galactic empires, but it was fast, flexible, and staffed with people who refused to accept failure. The leaders of Project Haven gathered before launch, looking at the ships, the crew, and the uncertain void beyond. There was fear, yes, but also something stronger: hope. The signal continued to come from the Andurian worlds. It was faint now, almost broken, but still strong enough to guide the humans. The messages had lost their hopeful tone. Now they carried the grief of a civilization already preparing for its end. Cities were falling. Families were trapped. The Selene Rift continued to consume everything in its path. The Andurians had almost stopped believing rescue was possible. The humans felt the weight of it. They knew they were the first, perhaps the only civilization willing to act. And that knowledge made the task both terrifying and sacred. They were not going to war for glory or conquest. They were going into space to answer a plea, to save lives that could easily have been ignored because compassion demanded it. As the fleet departed Earth, it was a quiet, solemn launch. Families, friends, and strangers gathered to watch the ships disappear into the blackness of space. There were no banners, no ceremonies, only the understanding that this journey could change history. It was a mission born of empathy, of human courage, and the willingness to act when others would not. Weeks into the journey, the fleet faced its first real challenge. Communication signals from the Andurian worlds were unstable. The rift's energy waves disrupted navigation and sensors. The human crews had to improvise constantly, adjusting trajectories and shielding their instruments from interference. Every small problem tested their skill and patience, but every success reminded them why they had come. They were bridging the impossible distance, driven by something deeper than strategy or duty, by heart. Meanwhile, the Andurians were still unaware. On one dying world, a council meeting was held amidst ruins. Leaders stared at the flickering star maps, calculating the time before the rift would reach their home system. "We are alone," a commander finally said, his voice breaking. "No one is coming. We must accept our fate." Families in the background recorded their final messages, and even young students, normally busy with learning and exploration, packed essential supplies for the few ships that remained operational, just in case someone arrived. Yet, unknown to them, the humans were approaching. Across light years, the blue planet continued to send ships, adapting every step of the way. They didn't know the Andurians personally. They didn't know what dangers awaited. And yet they did not stop. That willingness to act, to risk everything for others, was uniquely human. It was reckless, yes, but it was also pure and unyielding. When the first human scouts entered the Andurian system, the scene was terrifying. The Cellin Rift was closer than the Andurians had imagined, consuming moons, destroying satellites, and leaving black scars across star systems. Debris floated aimlessly, and the faint lights of cities on the verge of extinction blinked weakly. It was not a battlefield. It was a graveyard, and yet humans did not retreat. They deployed their ships carefully, scanning for survivors, coordinating relief operations, and improvising solutions in real time. Their technology was different, simpler in some ways, but it was flexible and effective. The Andurians, seeing them for the first time, could hardly believe their eyes. These were small, strange ships, yet they moved with purpose, facing dangers that had destroyed entire fleets before. An Andurian commander sent a cautious signal. "Identify yourselves." "Who are you?" The human response was simple. "We are here to help. That is all that matters." It was unlike anything the Andurians had ever heard. Not a threat, not a demand, not a claim to power, just a promise to help. For a species that had been abandoned, watching others turn away, it was a miracle. Slowly, as humans began evacuating civilians and deploying stabilizing measures, the Andurians began to understand something crucial. These beings, so small by galactic standards, so untested and chaotic, were their salvation. The galaxy may have ignored their plight, but humans had chosen differently. They had made a decision that would change everything. Families who had prepared to record final messages now watched as humans carried their loved ones to safety. Scientists who had been on the verge of giving up worked alongside human engineers, sharing knowledge, learning, and adapting. Soldiers who had prepared for the end now found allies they could trust. The Andurians began to call the humans by a simple phrase: "the ones who answered." And in that simple recognition, a bond was formed, not through treaties or shared technology, but through courage, compassion, and the act of showing up when no one else would. And the humans continued their work, never stopping, never hesitating. They repaired what they could, stabilized what remained, and reminded the Andurians that even in a universe that had turned its back, someone could choose to care. It was a turning point. The Andurians had given up hope. The galaxy had ignored them, and yet here were humans, acting not out of obligation, not out of self-interest, but because it was the right thing to do. It was reckless, yes, but it was life-saving. For the first time in months, the Andurians began to believe again, and somewhere deep in space, the message that had begun as a desperate plea was now being answered. The humans had arrived. The human fleet approached the Andurian system with care. From a distance, the devastation was impossible to ignore. Planets were scarred and blackened. Asteroids and remnants of destroyed ships floated silently in orbit. The energy waves of the Cellin Rift twisted space itself, creating patterns of light and shadow that looked like the aftermath of some cosmic storm. The Andurians had been preparing for extinction, and now before their eyes something completely unexpected appeared. Help. Humans were unlike any fleet the Andurians had ever encountered. Their ships were smaller, less uniform, and assembled with a variety of designs, but they moved with confidence and coordination. They weren't sleek or intimidating like the Andurian warships of old. They weren't powerful symbols of empire. They were practical, resilient, and unmistakably alive with purpose. The first contact was cautious. Andurian sensors picked up the humans long before visual confirmation. The Andurians expected weapons. They expected demands. They expected calculations, negotiations, or at the very least, questions about resources or authority. But instead, the humans broadcast a simple message. We are here to help. We are here to save as many as we can. The Andurian commander hesitated. The words were alien in their language, yet the meaning was clear. It was an offer of aid with no conditions, no hidden motives. It was something the Andurians had long forgotten existed in the galaxy. Pure, selfless action. Slowly, human ships began moving into orbit around the affected worlds. Drones and smaller crafts deployed to scan for survivors and stabilize dangerous zones. Human engineers worked in real time, repairing damaged starports, reinforcing city defenses, and creating temporary shelters for the Andurian citizens. Every move was deliberate. Every decision centered on saving life rather than gaining advantage. Families who had been preparing for death watched from the safety of their hiding places as humans lifted the injured, transported children, and coordinated evacuations. It was chaos controlled by experience and empathy. Humans were willing to risk everything, even their own lives, to save beings they had never met. For the Andurians, it was shocking. They had known many civilizations across the stars, and all had refused help, turned away, or made calculations about risk. No one had ever acted out of pure compassion. The humans were reckless, yes, but their courage and determination shone brighter than any Andurian fleet. The Andurians began whispering among themselves, calling the humans the ones who came, a name that spread quickly as hope slowly returned. The Kellan Rift continued its advance, unpredictable and devastating, but humans adapted. They deployed energy shields to stabilize affected areas temporarily, used advanced drones to clear debris, and coordinated evacuation routes with precision. Where entire fleets of the Andurians had failed, the humans succeeded, not through overwhelming power but through creativity, speed, and willingness to act without hesitation. In one city, nearly destroyed by the rift's energy waves, human engineers entered the ruins. Collapsed buildings blocked streets, fires still smoldered, and the air was thick with ash and dust. Andurian families huddled in corners, thinking they would never leave. The humans moved carefully, carrying supplies, guiding the frightened citizens, and clearing paths to safety. An Andurian child, clinging to a parent, asked why the humans were risking their lives for strangers. A human volunteer smiled gently and replied, "Because someone has to. Because it's the right thing to do." The words were simple, but they carried a weight the Andurians could feel deep in their hearts. As the human fleet spread through the system, they created temporary shelters and command centers in orbit, coordinating with the remaining Andurian fleets and planetary stations. Humans were teaching the Andurians how to adapt, sharing knowledge and techniques on the fly. It was collaboration in its purest form. There was no politics, no pride, no arguments about territory or supremacy, just the work of saving lives. The Andurians began to record these actions, documenting every rescue, every repaired system, every life saved. They realized they were witnessing something remarkable, not just the survival of their species, but a model of courage and empathy the galaxy had almost forgotten existed. Even as the Kellan Rift consumed parts of the system, the humans remained calm and focused. They didn't panic. They didn't turn away. They simply worked one task at a time, prioritizing the most urgent needs first. Where the Andurian fleets had been paralyzed by fear and indecision, humans acted decisively, saving tens of thousands of lives in a matter of days. The Andurian command began to change as well. Leaders who had once given up now coordinated with humans, learning quickly how to respond under pressure. Scientists worked with human engineers to stabilize energy fields, ensuring that entire cities could survive longer than they thought possible. Civilians who had been trapped began to emerge, guided to safety by humans who refused to leave anyone behind. Everywhere humans went, they left traces of hope. Andurians who had believed all was lost began to believe again. Families were united. Children laughed for the first time in weeks. Communities began organizing themselves, inspired by the humans' tireless energy and determination. Even the Andurian soldiers, once hardened and proud, were humbled by the humans' courage. They realized that heroism didn't require a perfect plan or invincible technology. Sometimes it required showing up when no one else would. The humans continued to push forward. They didn't just rescue the living. They worked to recover what could be saved from the wreckage: data archives, cultural records, and knowledge that might have otherwise been lost forever. Every recovery, every repaired system, was a reminder that the universe could still have compassion. Even in its darkest corners, at night, the Andurian skies were filled with human ships, small lights weaving between planets, stations, and debris fields. It looked chaotic to an outsider, but to the Andurians it was beautiful. It was life. It was action in the face of despair. It was proof that someone cared. Leaders of Project Haven coordinated every move, ensuring that resources were allocated efficiently and that no life was forgotten. Humans worked around the clock, often risking themselves in dangerous zones where the Cellin Rift's energy waves were strongest. Andurian commanders watched in awe, realizing that these beings, whom the galaxy had once dismissed, were capable of acts no empire could match. The Andurian people began to see humanity differently. Where once they had been dismissed as primitive, unpredictable, and unimportant, humans were now heroes in their eyes. Their actions were reckless, but their courage was undeniable. They had come when everyone else had refused, risking their own lives to save a species they had never met. It was during one particularly intense operation that an Andurian historian recorded something remarkable. A group of humans had rescued an entire community trapped in a city nearly swallowed by the rift. They moved tirelessly, carrying children, guiding the elderly, and coordinating with Andurian teams. When asked why they risked so much, the humans answered simply, "We couldn't do anything else. Someone had to act. We don't turn away from those in need." That statement, simple as it was, echoed across the Andurian worlds. It became a symbol, a lesson, and a promise. The humans were not there for glory, not for conquest, not for reward. They were there because they chose to be. And in that choice, they reminded the Andurians of something they had almost forgotten. Hope can exist, even in the darkest hour. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the Andurian system began to stabilize. The Cellin Rift was not gone, but its effects were mitigated, and more lives were saved than anyone had thought possible. The Andurians began to plan for the future, inspired by what they had seen. They began rebuilding cities, repairing fleets, and documenting every human action for history. By the time the humans prepared to leave the system temporarily to resupply and reinforce their fleet, they had changed the Andurians' perspective forever. The Alliance had once believed in strength, strategy, and power above all else. Now they understood that courage and compassion, even from the smallest and most unexpected source, could make the difference between extinction and survival. And somewhere deep in space, the Andurians whispered their thanks not just for the lives saved, but for the reminder that kindness still existed, that someone, even in the vast, uncaring galaxy, could hear a desperate cry and choose to act. Humans had arrived. They had brought hope where none remained, and in doing so, they had rewritten what the Andurians believed was possible. The universe had turned its back, but humanity had chosen differently. The Andurian system had begun to breathe again, but the danger was far from over. The Cellin Rift, unpredictable and deadly, still stretched across star systems, consuming matter and energy without pause. Entire fleets had been lost, cities were damaged beyond recognition, and the Andurians were still on the brink. For the first time in months, though, there was a glimmer of hope. Humans had arrived, and they were changing everything. The turning point came when human scientists began analyzing the patterns of the Cellin Rift. They observed it for days, studying its waves, its energy pulses, and its erratic movement. Unlike the Andurians, who had long accepted that nothing could stop it, humans refused to give up. They approached the problem differently. Where others saw only destruction, humans saw opportunity, something to adapt to, something to challenge, something to fight. Using a combination of human technology and what they had learned from the Andurians, they developed devices to stabilize small zones around critical cities. Energy pulses from the rift could be deflected or absorbed temporarily, giving the Andurians enough time to evacuate civilians and reinforce structures. It was painstaking work. Every hour mattered. Every failure could mean thousands of lives lost. The Andurians watched amazed. Their own scientists had studied the rift for months, but human ingenuity brought solutions that seemed almost impossible. A team of engineers working on one of the worst-hit planets deployed a series of mobile stabilizers around a collapsing city. Human operators risked exposure to the rift's deadly energy to place these devices, often improvising on the spot as conditions changed. Their courage was inspiring but also terrifying. They could have died at any moment, yet they did not hesitate. "Why are they doing this?" one Andurian soldier whispered. "Why risk so much for us?" "Because someone has to," another replied. "Because it is the right thing to do." The words echoed the same sentiment humans had expressed since they arrived. It was simple but powerful. Humans did not need recognition, rewards, or political gain. They were acting because no one else would, because they believed that life, even life that was not their own, was worth saving. With human guidance, the Andurians began to take more active roles in the rescue. They repaired ships, organized evacuation routes, and coordinated with human teams. Where humans were leading, the Andurians followed, learning from their methods and witnessing their dedication. There was no arrogance, no hierarchy, just collaboration. One of the most critical missions involved a planet whose surface was already partially consumed by the rift. Cities were crumbling, and millions were trapped. Humans deployed massive shuttles and drones, mapping the safest routes, lifting citizens from unstable buildings and transporting them to orbiting stations. Andurian pilots, who had once flown in the most advanced fleets of the galaxy, were now following human instructions, coordinating with smaller, more adaptable crafts. It was chaos, but a controlled chaos. Every rescue operation had to be precise. Every misstep could mean disaster. Yet humans never panicked. They were flexible, inventive, and unafraid to take calculated risks. When one transport was damaged by an energy surge, humans immediately adapted, rerouting ships and repairing systems on the fly. The Andurians, who had been paralyzed by fear, were learning how to survive even in the worst conditions. Meanwhile, human medics worked tirelessly to save lives. Hospitals that had been destroyed were rebuilt with temporary structures. Injured citizens were treated, often using hybrid human-Andurian technology. People who had given up hope now found themselves in safe hands, guided by hands that were not their own species but were steady and caring nonetheless. Children, who had not smiled in weeks, began to laugh again. Families reunited. Communities found new strength inspired by the humans' tireless work. The Andurians realized that heroism was not about power or perfection. It was about showing up, acting when it mattered most, and refusing to give up. The humans' influence did more than save lives. It transformed the Andurians' mindset. Where despair had once ruled, courage began to grow. The Andurians discovered that even in the face of what seemed impossible, hope could be revived. They had been waiting for someone to believe in them when the galaxy had given up. Humans had not just answered the call, they had sparked a change. One mission stood out among many. A large research facility containing centuries of Andurian history was threatened by a direct surge from the rift. The humans coordinated a multi-stage rescue operation. Engineers stabilized sections of the building, while medics evacuated scientists and families. Human drones lifted precious archives, carrying fragile knowledge through unstable corridors. At the same time, Andurian security forces protected the area, inspired by the humans' bravery. When the mission was complete, not a single life had been lost. Even critical artifacts were saved. The Andurians could not believe it. They had accepted loss as inevitable, yet humans had found a way to defy it. As the days passed, the Selene rift began to recede slightly, not because it was weakened, but because the humans had developed systems to contain it temporarily. It was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but it was no longer unstoppable. Cities were safe long enough for reconstruction. Fleets could operate without fear of total annihilation. The Andurians, once ready to surrender to fate, now had a chance to survive. In one of the command centers, an Andurian historian recorded a message to the universe. "A species we once dismissed as primitive has shown courage beyond measure. They came when no one else would, and through their actions they have given us a second chance." The words captured the essence of what had happened. Humans had not arrived as conquerors or rulers. They had arrived as saviors, motivated by something far greater than technology or power: empathy. Human leaders often spoke in simple terms: refusing accolades or recognition. "We don't do this for fame," one said to an Andurian audience. "We do this because it is right. Someone has to act when others won't. Someone has to care." The Andurians repeated these words almost like a mantra. They could not fully grasp it, but they could feel its truth. By now, humans and Andurians were working side by side. Knowledge flowed in both directions. Andurians taught humans about their technology and environment, while humans introduced new methods of problem-solving and improvisation. It was not just rescue, it was collaboration, innovation, and trust-building in the face of extinction. Across the system, the Andurians began rebuilding. Cities that had been lost were stabilized. Fleets were repaired. The remaining population began to see a future again, one that seemed impossible just weeks before. And all of this was because humans had refused to turn away. The Cylon Rift was still a threat, but the narrative had changed. Where once death had seemed certain, survival now felt possible. Andurian children who had once hidden in fear now watched humans work with awe. Families who had accepted loss now planned for tomorrow. The Andurians had been saved, not by their own technology or alliances, but by beings who chose to act when everyone else had ignored them. As the humans continued their mission, one lesson became clear to all who witnessed it. Courage and compassion can overcome fear and despair, even when the odds are impossible. The Andurians had faced extinction. They had expected abandonment. Yet here were humans risking everything, refusing to give up, and inspiring an entire civilization to fight for its survival. It was not magic. It was not luck. It was humanity. Their ability to act, to care, and to persist had turned the tide. And in doing so, they had rewritten the Andurians' understanding of hope, heroism, and life itself. By the time humans prepared to rotate some of their crews for rest and resupply, the Andurians were no longer waiting to die. They were organizing, rebuilding, and learning to survive again. Every life saved, every city stabilized, and every plan successfully executed became a testament to what one species could do when it chose to care about another. The turning tide had begun. Humans had not only stopped the immediate destruction, they had shown the Andurians that survival was possible. They had sparked courage, hope, and determination in a civilization that had given up. And perhaps most importantly, they had proven that even in a galaxy that had abandoned them, help could arrive when it mattered most. The story of survival, compassion, and bravery was no longer written by the Andurians alone. Humans had joined it, leaving their mark not with conquest but with courage, creativity, and an unwavering commitment to life. The universe had watched in silence for too long. Now it was hearing the sound of hope, carried by humans who refused to turn away. The Andurian system had survived. Cities that had been on the brink of collapse now stood tall, and fleets that had been nearly destroyed were repaired and ready. The Cylon Rift was still a presence, a reminder of what could happen if vigilance faltered. But the Andurians were no longer paralyzed by fear. They had been given a second chance, and they knew it. All of this was because humans had arrived. They had risked everything to save a civilization they had never met. They had come not for glory, not for resources, not for recognition, but simply because it was right. Their presence had changed the course of history for the Andurians and, in many ways, for the galaxy itself. The Andurians had begun to understand that their own belief in power, pride, and alliances had limits. Alone, all of their technology, fleets, and centuries of knowledge had been useless against the Cylon Rift. They had faced extinction not because they lacked strength, but because the galaxy they had trusted had turned its back. Humans had reminded them that courage, compassion, and action, simple, selfless choices, could make all the difference. In the months that followed, humans did not leave immediately. They stayed to help rebuild, to train, and to ensure that the Andurians could protect themselves from future threats. They shared knowledge, teaching the Andurians new ways to stabilize their systems and repair damaged cities. They introduced new technologies for energy management and emergency response. They taught the Andurians how to work under pressure, how to improvise, and how to act decisively even when the odds seemed impossible. The Andurians were quick learners, but they were also humbled. They had thought themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy, yet it was humans, smaller, younger, less experienced, who had saved them. The lesson was clear. Intelligence alone is not enough. Action matters. Courage matters. Compassion matters. For many Andurians, the emotional impact was just as significant as the physical recovery. Families who had been torn apart by the rift were reunited. Children who had grown up in fear and isolation now smiled again. Communities that had been fractured by panic and despair now organized themselves with renewed purpose. Everywhere humans went, they left traces of hope and resilience. Stories of human heroism spread quickly. They were not tales of warriors conquering enemies or empires expanding territories. They were stories of lives saved, risks taken, and strangers helping strangers. And the Andurians passed these stories down, teaching future generations not only about survival, but about the moral choices that defined true courage. Some of the youngest Andurians began to look at humans differently. They had grown up hearing that humans were reckless, emotional, and primitive. Now they saw them as heroes. Humans had faced what no one else dared to face, had adapted to impossible conditions, and had acted without hesitation. Andurian children asked questions about the humans, wanting to learn from their bravery, their choices, and their willingness to act for others. Leaders of the Andurian Alliance, once proud and isolated, now sought guidance and partnership with humans. They had been humbled, and with humility came a new perspective. Cooperation and trust replaced pride and suspicion. Diplomats recorded messages of thanks. Historians documented human actions, and artists began to capture the incredible courage they had witnessed. The galaxy had tried to abandon them, but humans had shown them a better way forward. Humans did not seek recognition for what they had done. They did not demand tribute or titles. Their reward was simple: seeing lives saved, seeing hope restored, and knowing that they had acted when no one else would. For the Andurians, however, the impact was profound. Humans had given them something far more valuable than technology or knowledge. They had given them faith in the goodness of others. As the Andurians rebuilt their system, they also began to reconsider their place in the galaxy. They realized that alliances and treaties were only as strong as the willingness of civilizations to act when needed. Power and wealth could not protect them from extinction, but courage, compassion, and action, qualities humans had demonstrated, could. This insight began to reshape the Andurian approach to diplomacy, defense, and community. Over time, small human expeditions continued to visit Andurian worlds. They worked alongside Andurian engineers, shared knowledge, and helped monitor the Cellen Rift. The humans remained a symbol of hope, a living example of what one species could do when it chose to care. The Andurians, once isolated and abandoned, were now connected to a larger universe of cooperation and empathy. The Cellen Rift itself became a reminder, not only of the danger that had nearly destroyed a civilization, but of the resilience and courage that humans had brought. Andurian scientists, inspired by human ingenuity, continued to study it with renewed determination. They understood that survival was possible, but only if they were willing to act, adapt, and work together. As generations passed, the story of the humans who had saved the Andurians became legend. Children grew up hearing tales of the blue planet whose people had arrived when no one else would. Scholars debated the methods humans had used, artists painted scenes of daring rescues, and leaders carried forward lessons of courage, compassion, and moral responsibility. The Andurians never forgot that their survival had depended not on their own power, but on the willingness of another species to act without hesitation. Humanity had demonstrated that true heroism does not always involve strength or dominance. It involves empathy, courage, and the choice to help when it is most needed. Over time, the Andurians began to extend these lessons beyond their own system. They shared stories of human courage with other civilizations, encouraging cooperation, empathy, and action. Where once the galaxy had ignored their cries, now others began to understand that helping one another could mean the difference between life and extinction. Humans, meanwhile, returned home to their own world, not seeking glory but carrying the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference. They had ventured across light years to help beings they had never met. And in doing so, they had changed the course of history for an entire civilization. The Andurians, once abandoned and despairing, were now alive, hopeful, and connected to a universe that had seemed indifferent. For the Andurians, the legacy of that moment was clear. They had learned that survival was not guaranteed by technology or power alone. Survival required courage, compassion, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. Humanity had shown them that these qualities were not limited by experience, size, or influence. They could come from anyone willing to choose them. And so the Andurians vowed to remember the lesson of the humans. They rebuilt not only their cities and fleets, but their understanding of what it meant to be a civilization. They honored the humans' courage in history, in art, and in culture. They told their children the story of the species that had answered when everyone else had turned away. The galaxy may have ignored the Andurian cries for help, but one species had not. Humanity had acted, and in doing so had left a lasting mark. The Andurians carried that truth forward, that courage, empathy, and action could change the course of events, even against impossible odds. In the years that followed, the Andurian system thrived once more. Trade routes reopened, communities rebuilt. Young Andurians trained not only in science and technology, but in the values that humans had shown them: courage, initiative, and the importance of helping others. The humans, though distant, remained a symbol of what was possible. Their arrival had proven that hope could exist even in the darkest times, and that compassion could travel across the stars to make a real difference. The Andurians understood that the universe was vast and often indifferent, but that individual choices could shine through the darkness, guiding civilizations toward survival, cooperation, and a better future. The story of humanity's actions was passed down from generation to generation. It was not told as a tale of power or conquest, but as a story of courage, empathy, and the choice to act. And for the Andurians, it became a guiding principle. Even when the galaxy turns its back, there is always the possibility of someone stepping forward to make a difference. The legacy was simple, yet profound. Humans had proven that helping others, even when the odds are impossible, is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. They had arrived when no one else would, and in doing so, they had saved a civilization and changed the course of galactic history. And in every Andurian heart, the memory remained. When they desperately needed help, only humans answered the plea.